Welcome to the Geekly. My name is Jules.
I'm Lex, and we've got loads of cool stuff today. We're talking about Code 8 with Stephen Amell and Robbie Amell, some more episodes of Better Than Us, and the finale of Dispatches from Elsewhere.
Let's start with Code 8. There were 9 minutes of credits because they raised, I think, 200,000. Well, they attempted to raise $200,000 on Indiegogo, but ended up raising like $3 million. So they had, I think this is right, I think they had 30,000 people to thank in the credits. I'm not sure whether they were able to thank them all in the credits, but I did stay just to check, and there was a wall of people at the end. What do you think of this film?
Stephen and Robbie Amell look way too much alike to play anything other than family members. They're just kind of like almost carbon copies of each other. I know they're cousins; they're not actually siblings, but I never believed for a second that they were complete strangers. Two, I can't see anything but Oliver Queen when I look at Stephen Amell. I tried, I really tried, but I don't think he has a lot of range. Maybe, I don't know. Like, the concept was interesting. It could have been a cool world. I didn't feel like it got developed really well. There wasn't a lot of world building. There really wasn't a lot of character development. Connor, I think his name was, he seemed to like very quickly go like in less than 3 days go from being this kind of like good boy, does what his mom says, follows the rules, and keeps his head down, to like intimidating and threatening people with like zero qualms about it. And I think they could have stretched that out a little bit more and shown a little bit more development there. Like, I totally buy that he could have gone from point A to point B. It just felt like he did a flip like in 5 seconds. By the end of it, it just kind of felt like a 90-minute Arrow episode. Like, that's kind of the sophistication that was there.
Yeah.
And I loved Arrow. Like, it's great, but come on, the CW is the CW, and I expect a little bit more out of my films than my television.
Yeah, I can't disagree with a single thing you just said. I think particularly the lack of character development, I really felt that. I'm kind of torn because I get I think this was like created by Stephen Amell and Robbie Amell. Like they did a short film like several years before this, and this is like the feature length. And I just feel like everyone's got to start somewhere, and so I respect that this might be like something what they want to do. They maybe want to write, they maybe want to direct their own material, but it committed the cardinal sin of just being so incredibly ordinary. And I don't really feel like there was anything unique here at all. Sure, it was set in like a kind of Nolan-esque real contemporary world, and it featured people with superpowers, and it was seeing them like on building sites, in the actual day to day of what that would be like. There weren't any superheroes, but there were these superpowered people. But it brought nothing new to the table. It felt like a GTA mission tree somewhere in the middle of the game, where you had three robberies throughout this film, each slightly tougher than the last, and then you've got the kind of twist where you have to then kill the guy that's been giving you the missions. Yeah, it felt kind of like straight out of a computer game to me. And yeah, I agree. Like, I don't think there are many people that, if you know Stephen Amell and Robbie Amell, would believe that they didn't know each other because they look so similar. Yeah, it kind of disappointing.
I mean, fair enough that this is their first outing. We're all a little bit, I don't want to say embarrassed, but we learn from our first outings, and they're never entirely perfect. But I was afraid they were going to have Connor and the girl fall for each other, and even like at the end scene where she's sitting in the prison waiting room, I was just thinking, oh fuck, they're gonna do it. And then like her dad came out, and I was like, okay, the ending was kind of respectable.
Did you find it weird seeing Stephen Amell with, firstly, powers, and secondly, swearing?
Oddly, no. I think in my head, Oliver Queen always swore. The powers thing was a bit weird. I found it interesting that he was like telekinetic. I was pondering that through the film. Like, I wonder why he chose that power. I also kind of wondered, like, about the genetics of power, because obviously Connor's parents both had powers, but one was like ice and his dad was electric, so he just ended up being electric. And then like the cop, his kid had powers, but it didn't seem like he or the mother had powers. So is it just like this weird genetic mutation? Or, okay, basically I thought way too much about the world that this existed in. That's kind of how uninteresting the plot was. I was like contemplating practical aspects of the world.
You wanted to do the world building.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was just dominant genes. That's what I put it down to, like eye colour or whatever. But I didn't really think about it too much. The film didn't entice me enough to make me think about it too much. I watched it, in one sitting. I didn't kind of get my iPad out or anything, but I was probably glazed over for most of it. So I don't really think I could recommend this. Maybe there's some Stephen Amell purists out there or completionists.
I mean, I think, like, if it's kind of like a rainy day and you're in an iffy mood and you just want something that's kind of easy and comfortable to watch, like, this would be a good option. It's not going to stress you out. It's not going to make you depressed. It kind of has a happy ending. But no, I wouldn't kind of say, oh, you have to go see this film.
Okay, let's move over to Better Than Us. We watched episodes 5, 6, 7 and 8. These episodes are all 50-something minutes long. I've never looked at a single episode to check how much time has got to go. You might feel differently, but I've always found the pacing of this show to be pretty good, and I've always been intrigued and engaged with this TV show.
Yeah, I mean, same. It's a really weird experience because I still do not like any of these people. And they keep making all of these, really bad decisions. Every single one of them. Nobody makes a good decision at all. And I just, the entire time I'm thinking, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Can you not see that that's just gonna, fuck everything up? And the mom chasing, Arissa off, and I was like, damn, woman, you know that she's important for, X reasons. Why do you tell her to run away and never come back? I mean, obviously, yeah, you don't want, a murdering robot around your young daughter, but still, she could have done something. Just wait in the hallway and protect the family. Yeah, I'm very intrigued and very, anxious and confused and weirdly invested in these horrible people's lives.
We had some interesting revelations in this set of episodes. We found out that Safronov operated on Toporov's son. He's a very good surgeon. He did everything right, but unfortunately the son died. And Toporov just, sued the hospital, tried to make Safronov's life a complete hell. He had to end up resigning, and that's caused, this friction between him and his wife. They lost their house. She asked him to go and, apologise, and he wouldn't because he was kind of too proud, and he thought her going to see Toporov, it was kind of a betrayal. I thought that was pretty interesting, actually, and I like the fact that we, as well as, our quote-unquote heroes of the story, getting some backstory with them, I like that we also got this Toporov backstory where we found out that his wife Svetlana just kind of went into this deep depression after the death of their son, and she had to be put in it seemed to be some kind of psychiatric ward. And so both families suffered, even though one was very much in a position of power. I just like that the show bothered to give us both sides of the story because nobody came out of it well. In general, I like what this show does with flashbacks. I like that they're short. I like that they are definitely not a crutch of the show like you'd get in something like, Arrow. And I like that I just feel that they always add something. I get what you're saying about still not particularly liking any of these people, but I do like the way they're being fleshed out. And it seems that due to this deal they're making with Toporov about, get Arissa to, win this competition and we'll give you your life back. You can be a surgeon again. And it seems to have given him purpose. That this weight has been lifted off of him. You can almost see it in his face. He's not, redeemed by any means, but the family unit seems to be happier in themselves than they were in the first 4 episodes. And I think Georgie is kind of the keystone. And it's just been kind of... he's growing on me is what I'm saying. He's not redeemed by any stretch, but I think of all of them, he's growing on me the most.
The revelation that he'd actually operated on Boris, was the one bit that I was just like, it's too convenient, it's contrived. I didn't like that connection between them. I didn't feel that connection between them was actually necessary. And it feels like too much of a coincidence that out of everybody, Arissa would just, accidentally pick this family to bond to. I liked the flashbacks, like you said. I like the way the show does flashbacks. They're very short. They're kind of done very much in the way that memories happen, where they're just like these snippets of fragments of bits and pieces that you get that are triggered by very specific things, and they kind of fill in the gaps. I liked the backstory for both families. I liked seeing what happened with Georgie and Ala. It was nice to get some depth to Vic, who has up until this point seemed very kind of one note. This sort of corporate, greedy, selfish asshole who doesn't care about anybody, and doesn't appreciate his wife, and she sort of seemed very similar. But to see them both vulnerable and hurting and kind of trying to figure out how to get out of that, and not helping each other, you can see how they ended up the way they did. And so I think that was a really important thing to see, and it did kind of humanize both of them a little bit more, whereas up until now, I said everybody was horrible, but they seemed like the villains of the show, them and Bars. But yeah, overall, I'm kind of happy to see where it goes. I'm still invested in it. I'm not sitting there going like, oh my god, when is this episode going to end? I'm really curious to see what's going to happen with Bars now that Gleb, tried to kill him. Although I was thinking, why bury him alive? It's a rookie mistake to put somebody in a hole and not make sure they're dead if you want them dead.
It was astonishing, wasn't it? It was a really great visual. There's that thing where they look into this pit and they get shot in the back of the head, and that's it. You see that in films quite a lot. But to wing him and then to kind of put the soil, this digger to push the soil down and just abandon it, assuming it's, he's going to suffocate or whatever. Again, just such a rookie mistake. I think it was, I know that they were dead, but when they buried bodies in Murder House, it reminded me of when they erected the gazebo above the bodies. That's the one thing I was thinking of as I watched this. You do something, people be like, oh, what are you digging your garden up for? You've got to have a reason. But yeah, being buried alive, either in a coffin or not, that'd be a bad way to go.
Yeah, I've never liked Bars. He's very cool looking, but yeah, I felt for him as the dirt was being pushed on top of him, and I was like, oh my god, he's just, that's a horrible way to kill somebody. I also find it interesting that Gleb is always reading English books, English classics as well, not Pulp Fiction or romance novels or anything. 1984 was one of them. It's a weird character trait that isn't explained or really mentioned at any point, but I definitely noticed that every time we see him, he's reading, and then he goes out and does these incredibly thuggish things. It's an interesting contrast.
Do you have any kind of thoughts on this show's presentation of these robots? Because they're not a Dolores, they're not entirely human looking. There is still a kind of uncanny valley kind of sense to them. Why do you think they've gone with this kind of aesthetic?
Honestly, I'm not particularly sure. I've been thinking about representations of AI creatures, people. I haven't decided what we should call them. Because there's a huge spectrum. You have the AI and Omniscient, which is basically just these kind of very simple drones that go around and collect information to Westworld's hosts, to the synthetics of Picard, Martin and Osmosis. There's just a huge variety of how AI is represented and how realistic it gets. I think Westworld is probably the most human out of all of them, where you absolutely cannot tell the difference between a human and a host. But again, I'm thinking the show reminds me quite a bit of Humans, which is no longer, I think it only had 2 or 3 seasons. But again, they did that kind of very sort of almost human thing that Better Than Us does, where they look very human, but there's kind of there's a stiltedness to their movements. There's a too perfectness to their skin and their appearance and their speech and everything like that. And I find it's actually creepier when you can't tell the difference. In Westworld, I'm constantly looking at people and thinking, are you a host or are you a human? I don't know. In this show, when people can't tell that Arissa is a bot, I I kind of don't believe it.
I don't
Really.
either. That's literally the next point I was going to make to you. It's impossible for anybody to look these robots directly in the face and not know.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. So yeah, I think that's an interesting choice where they're very definitely making kind of like a stylized bot, and I mean, the actress does it fantastically. I was watching her in like episode 8 and just thinking like, wow, she has amazing control over her. Like when she goes to strangle Vic and he like hits the emergency button and she just like freezes there. Like it was so abrupt and so mechanical. It's just like, wow, she's really good at controlling her body. I think it's important that the bots aren't like completely human seeming, because like Orisa is a prototype. She's the first of her kind, and she's the very first bot that's kind of empathetic and has the ability to read emotions and potentially be close to consciousness, whereas the other ones are very sort of servile and functional. So I think that's probably why there still is that little bit of artificiality to them. It's indicating that they haven't quite reached that purely human aesthetic in their bot manufacturing.
I think the actress is doing a really phenomenal job. Certain sections that I liked were the disarming sequence. I liked when she was behind the bar serving drinks and she had this kind of slightly deranged smile on her face, which I thought was really creepy. And the moment where she was serving food, but she was actually trying to give like dietary recommendations to people who she thought shouldn't be eating certain things that they wanted to eat. She seems to be kind of like Spock in the way that she's learning about humanity through these questions, and she's finding it so difficult to understand this confusing species of people.
Yeah, I find her kind of developing relationship with Allah as well has both been a source of extreme anxiety and kind of fascination, because she was very resistant to Allah when she first returned and was trying to kind of turn Georgie against her, and she kept saying, Allah's lying, Allah's lying, Allah's lying. She doesn't love you, and was very firm in saying Allah's not part of the family. But then, through their kind of interactions, and Allah hasn't really warmed up to Orisa either. She feels kind of replaced by her. She doesn't really trust her. She obviously has some like insecurities of her own about her abilities as a parent. But they've sort of reached this kind of weird truce where Allah was kind of like the main force for teaching her things, and Orisa was kind of confiding in her, and then there was the like, oh yeah, I've killed people moment, and Allah was like, okay, fuck no, you've got to go. But yeah, there were several moments I was like, oh my god, she's gonna kill Allah because she perceives her as a threat to the family, and it was always very I was always very aware of the fact that she did not consider Allah part of the family, so she could easily at any moment decide that Allah was a threat. I know like some people really get turned off with the whole like foreign language subtitle thing, but I mean it's a really interesting study on technology and AI and family dynamics, and I don't even know if it's real Russian culture, but like kind of a very corrupt culture which could actually be anywhere at this point in time. Like I think in media a lot we get these sort of two perfect characters, whereas the characters in Better Than Us are all very human and deeply flawed, and their humanness is kind of put up against the bots, and it's not romanticized, it's not justified, it's not like Star Trek, our emotional capabilities and our unpredictability and irrationality is actually a strength. It's like these people are just fucked up, and they are trying to do the best they can. They're not making the right decisions, but they're trying to do the best they can, and it's a very realistic view of life.
Yeah, I think it's a really well made show. I've just enjoyed watching it, and for something with 50-minute episodes, it does just shock me that I've never once thought, wow, this is over long. Because 50 minutes, that's a big commitment of time. And often when you watch something that long, you think, well, I could have snipped this out, I could have snipped that out. But often is the case where the episode will end and I'll be like, wow, was that 50 minutes? Like, I can't believe it. Let's move on to Dispatches from Elsewhere, episodes 9 and 10.
Oh my god. I tweeted about this a bit as I was watching it, and like episode 9 kind of reminded me why I love all of these characters and why I was so attached to them. I was kind of disappointed that the game didn't resolve itself, but also at the same time I think if they had actually resolved the game, it would have just been disappointing somehow. Like there was no way they could, kind of the way the game itself was resolved. Like it's sort of better that it was left as this kind of open ended thing. Because I firmly believe if you can't end something well, just don't end it. I think sometimes people get too caught up in like, oh, I must tie up all the loose ends, and it just makes things too perfect and too neat. At the end of episode 9, I was very nervous about where it was going to go, because it definitely seemed like this was all going to be some sort of dream sequence or psychosis or something like that of Peter's. It intrigued me that Jason Segel injected himself into the show in a very honest and real and kind of brutal way. You know, we're sort of used to seeing him as this goofball, and I mean, as he's mentioned several times and was mentioned in the final episode, he's a weird guy. I missed Janice and Simone and Fredwin, but as it progressed through his story and his kind of coming to terms with himself and injecting himself back into life and writing the script and things like that, I also started to identify with the actual person. And I think up until the moment that they were sitting outside watching the end on the screen, I was completely there. But the last, 15 minutes or so, where it switched back to Richard E. Grant and he made this speech with kind of a bunch of very basic philosophy, and I say that as somebody who only understands basic philosophy now, but I mean, this was even kind of rudimentary for me. They just hammered home the idea that it was about community way too much, and I didn't enjoy the videos from fans. I mean, I didn't see anything wrong with kind of acknowledging the crew and everybody that participated in it. I mean, fair enough, that's kind of a theater thing anyway. But yeah, the kind of videos at the end and Segel kind of addressing the audience, it felt forced, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
I've probably quite different views, I think. When I watched episode 9, it was probably not quite what I wanted. I probably wanted a resolution to the game, or I wanted maybe them to have some focus onto the game. But I always enjoyed seeing them together. I liked, what happened with Peter. I liked what happened with Simone. I thought that Lee was quite lucky because she enabled Fredwin. And Fredwin is someone that, in some respects, you can say he's not particularly well. And when they walked in on him, and Janice was like, oh, God, I really actually wondered what state he was going to be in. But I like that
I thought he was going to be dead.
Yeah, so did I. Yeah.
I was really worried that he was going to be dead, especially since he was narrating the episode. It was like, oh my God, they've killed Fredwin.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been a very strange choice to make, but they all kind of got their resolution. The bit that I panicked about was when they went to, was it like 3215 Spring Lane, and they found out that Clara was Lee, and when Peter walked off with the kid, I was like, oh dear, what are they about to pull here? And then when we went into episode 10 and he was called Jason and somebody called him Mr. Segel at one point, and then I realised that we're now actually talking about the guy, and I knew he'd played the game and I knew he'd had troubles in his real life, but I didn't quite know how far they were going to go with it. It got very meta, and much like non-linear narrative, meta is something that is often used very badly. I thought the use of meta here was absolutely superb. Jason Segel had earned a lot of goodwill from me in the first 9 episodes of this TV show, and even if the meta had been used a little bit poorly, I probably still would have given him the benefit of the doubt. We saw the kid, the child actor, then you find out that Jason Segel was actually a child actor, and he's tweeted a picture of him in the kind of clown face makeup, and you realise that was actually his past. And the kind of middle third was him, actually going to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, getting the leaflet, playing the game, and I thought it was just so brave. And I thought it was like the man had, got a knife, carved down the middle of his chest, opened his ribs up and just put his beating heart out on the table, because he was entirely naked there. The moment where he's talking to the child, kind of in his house, Jason Segel says, no victim, no villain, just me and my choices. And I just think that's just something that too many people can relate to. And it was this kind of awakening, and he starts writing the TV show, and it felt like, that moment probably really happened. He probably had this moment, and it was just so raw. The other moment that really got to me was when he was on the stage and he was talking to Andre Benjamin in the kind of seats. And Andre Benjamin said, like, I'm invested, like, I love this. It's like Fight Club on acid written by someone who likes life. And then he just said, like, I'm in, but tell me why you need to make this. And when the camera kind of panned around Jason Segel, to the point where I actually wondered if he would look down the camera. Just brave, again, just so brave. And if this whole TV show was to give a man kind of his love of life back and was to kind of get him his soul back, then fine. The fact that I absolutely loved every minute of it is a bonus. I'm just very thankful for this TV show, and I think a lot of people, unfortunately, not enough people have watched it. I've seen the numbers. Not enough people are talking about it, but it needs to be seen by like a wider audience. And I think particularly while we're all in isolation, it's something that a lot of people can benefit from, as a lot of people are kind of rethinking their life while they're in this isolation. Do I want to go back to what life was? The bit where they were sat outside and we saw the crew, it was so, like, it truly was the definition of self-indulgence. But again, I was very happy for him to do that. The bit with Richard E. Grant, I'm studying a PhD, you already have your PhD. There'd be a lot of people that watched it that may be just totally unaware of many of the concepts that have been in this TV show. So if it benefited a single person, then I'm all for it. But I think the whole message of the whole TV show was get out of isolation and just engage with people, because that is where the magic can happen. You can't really create the magic that they were alluding to in this show alone. It was about becoming the team. And at the end, when everybody said we, yeah, it was a bit weird. But I just think this TV show as a whole is just a very special bit of entertainment, and I just hope people remember it, and I hope people are watching it, and I hope it gets some kind of acknowledgement at award season, because then maybe more people will watch it. I just wish more TV shows kind of took these kind of risks, because it was raw and it was real, and yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I don't think that's really completely different from my take on the show. Maybe I didn't explain it well. The last, I don't know, 10 minutes or so was incredibly self-indulgent, and I probably would have cut some bits out of it. It could have been cool. I mean, as you said, there are probably people who didn't kind of pick up on all of the concepts, and maybe they sort of needed a sort of explanation thing. I tend to view things by like, well, I know that. Why are you telling me that? Going back to the moment with Andre Benjamin, like, that actually really stuck out to me, because, like, coincidentally, earlier in the day, somebody asked me the very same thing about a project that I'm doing. Like, I fumbled around for an answer, but in the end, it was very similar to what Jason Segel said, and I just came back with, like, it's fun. Like, I want to do it because it's fun. And so that was kind of a very significant moment, just because it actually happened to me, like, maybe a couple of hours before I actually saw it on screen. And so much of this show has been like that, where I've just been like, I've thought that, I've felt that, like, you know, some quote is literally exactly the words I've been trying to find to convey a certain concept. Every single one of the characters I've been able to identify with in one way or another, and in a lot of ways it's been heartbreaking to watch them all struggle with themselves, because I do identify with them so much. And, you know, some of them are dealing with things that I've dealt with in the past and had to come to terms with. Some of them are things, particularly Janice, is kind of stuff I will have to deal with in the future. Some of it's stuff that, like, I'm dealing with now. And, like, somebody on Twitter was asking about Dispatches from Elsewhere and whether it was worth watching, and I just said Dispatches from Elsewhere is an experience, and it is probably the thing that I've watched that I've enjoyed the most in my entire life, and, like, I'm going to make everybody watch. I think it's really unfortunate that it's not technically available outside the US right now.
Well,
I think it would get a much wider audience if it was available internationally.
It's funny you say that, because I did do a bit of research, and I know that not many people in the UK have BT. We have a lot of listeners in the UK, so I'll say it anyway. Tonight it starts on AMC, which is a BT exclusive channel, and it starts tonight. What date is it? Wednesday the 29th of April, with a double bill. So if by chance you're listening to this on the day or the day after or whenever, it's on. So go and watch it in the UK. You have no excuse.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think everybody needs to see this show, and it does have a lot of very important lessons. It's kind of unfortunate that it's coming out when we are all literally isolated and stuck in front of our screens. But as you said, a lot of people were using this time to kind of reevaluate themselves and think about what they want out of life, and try to, and taking steps to sort of improve their life, or try new things, or pick up new hobbies. And so maybe this will help encourage them, and maybe after we all get let out, it will encourage people to get out and engage with life more, because we have been so kind of stuck inside, and detached from what's really going on, and kind of only connected through various screens.
I think every single episode of this whole season had at least three amazingly powerful one-liners that were almost mantras. I've talked about a few already, but the one I liked was right at the beginning, where I think it's Fredwin says, "We are as we've always been in the middle of our story." I think that's just such an important thing for everybody to remember, that it's not the end. There is always time. Whatever your job is, whatever your life it entails, just go out and do something as soon as you can. Because yeah, we're in the middle of our story. We're not at the end.
I really like that line, because we are it's very true. We are always in the middle of our story, because we have everything that happened in the past, and we have this sort of undefinable future ahead of us, and it's really easy to get caught up in things and just start treading water and feel like, oh well, when A happens, then I'll do B, and put things off and put things off, and never really take the time to do the things we want to do, because it can always happen later. So I think that was a really important message of, yeah, just get out and do it. Don't keep putting it off. Like, your life isn't on pause right now. You're still living. You can still make choices. You can still have some control over where your life goes, and it's not the end.
One question for you: season 2, yes or no, one word answer.
Oh, no.
Is the right answer.
Like, it breaks me to say
Yeah.
that, because I want these characters back. I love what they've done. Jason Segel's mind is so weird and so creative and so many things. Like, I would love to see him do more outside of his kind of very superficial comedy scripts that he's done so far. Like, apparently he played David Foster Wallace a few years ago. Like, how did I not hear about this? He said that because David Foster Wallace was able to talk about his addiction, that Segel was able to realize, like, okay, yeah, this is something that we can talk about. This is something that should be talked about. You don't have to hide it away. And that was when it was kind of his wake-up call, when he started kind of going to AA, and seeking to make changes in his life to be kind of a better, healthier version of himself. But yeah, I want to see more stuff from him, but I think continuing on this thread would be a mistake.
Right, well, I think that will do us for today. Thank you for listening. Thank you to our new listener in Manitoba, who hasn't missed an episode in about 2 months. You can find us on all the social media. You can find us in all the places you get podcasts. Please have a listen also to our recent podcast away, featuring Chantel from Lady Justice Podcast. Great, thanks for listening. See you next time.
See ya.